an event with Josefina Skerk over here. Before I introduce her more fully, it's great to see a lot of people here. I was getting really excited to see a lot of people interested in the event on the Facebook. Yeah, great to see a lot of you here. So this event, it'll be interesting to hear where people are from. But this event is part of a CMIS course. So CMIS is the Center for Environment and Development Studies here at Uppsala University and also SOU. And this course, this lecture is also a part of the course called Critical Perspectives on Sustainable Development in Sweden. So welcome to the students from the course as well. So just on the course note, before I forget to say that, we'll pass around the attendance sheet. And of course, for those of you who are not taking the course, you obviously do not have to sign this.
So if you don't find your name, don't you?
All right. Is there anything else related to the course? No. So maybe can I just do the quick count to see who is here? So who is maybe taking a course at CMIS? Okay, a lot of people, so that was a lot. Maybe, is there anyone studying anthropology or something related to that field? Do you have that? People studying at the Department of Government or Political Science? Okay, quite a few as well. And then people who identify themselves as feminists, maybe? All right. Wow. No, we got a lot of feel of who's here, and maybe anyone else that's here that didn't raise the hand. All right. So that was actually the 4 categories that I guess that was here was a lot of the people. Actually, the feminist was the most. Great, so I think I'll move on to introducing this exciting guest we have here. Sorry, I'm going to read a biography on my phone. So, Josefina Skerk is the Vice President of the Saami Parliament in Sweden. And are you 29 years old?
Yeah.
Okay, 29 years old. Lives in the village of about, on the internet I wrote 50 people, but now she's moved to a village that is 7 people. In the north of Sweden. She's a member of the Sami community, the northernmost indigenous peoples in Europe. Are you still studying law at the moment? Okay, she used to study law at the university. This is a little bit old, but she also studied at Uppsala University, so she is alumni of Uppsala, and it's the first time to give a talk at Uppsala, so that's exciting. Welcome back. And she has been active in Sami politics since she was 19, and is the vice leader of the Jakt och Fiskesamana party, which represents the hunting and fishing party. This is the largest party in the Saami Parliament in Sweden, and she is working on land and water protection, the rights of indigenous children to their language, and all children to a good school with the possibility to eliminate differences due to class. She was also the first person in the Saami Parliament to raise the issue of LGBTQ persons' rights and make sure that the Saami Parliament officially joined the Pride Parade. So, I think that was a short but catchy introduction. I'll just leave the floor to you, and maybe we'll take a small break sometime in the middle, depending on where we are in the talk, and we'll have definitely a lot of time for discussions at the end. So, warmly welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. It's really nice to come back to Uppsala. I studied law here, and this time to speak on my favorite topic in the world, some issues. Like Sahiko said, I am the Vice President of the board in Saami Parliament. In case anyone wants to contact me or anything, that's my contact details. I usually say that one can't speak for all. Sami people are often asked, even children, to represent everyone, as if you could ask one person and get everyone's perspective. that's not possible. We are very diverse. But I guess I am pretty much as close as you come to a person that you could ask for everyone's perspective, as I am actually politically elected to be in the position to speak for the Sami people, elected by the Sami people. I come from up there, and that's where I live. That's my tiny village, Getchau, which is also where the Sami side of my family comes from. So it's really, really, really nice to be living there right now. And it's a possibility through my work. So most of the people, well, the few people in my village is relatives, and then we have a German family that has moved in. And I thought I'd speak a little bit about my background and then some traditional Sami land use, and I'll move on to some brief facts about the Sami people and some policy-making issues. And then we'll take a break, and I will open up for discussion, because I generally think that the best thing we can do is to talk to each other. So I'll just run through a few things. On the picture, you can see that's my grandmother's brother, my granduncle. He's sadly recently passed, but he's been one of the true role models in my life. So I took this photograph a couple of years ago when we were out hunting. And he was at that time 89 years old, and he's more or less lived in village Getchau his entire life. And it's just the best thing I know is to follow him around. So when we go hunting, I walk with him, and it's not so much about actually getting meat to the table, but it's much more about listening to his stories. Because when I walk next to him, when we sneak around the forest and we sit and wait, he tells me stories. And it's walking with the elders on Sami territory, in our own territory. It's like reading a storybook in some senses. You get all the stories of the people that have been there before you, your ancestors. This rock ties to this person, this old tree has this story, this happened at this time, this lake, this, every little thing ties together to who you are and where you come from. And I try to tell this because people usually think that you need to be Sami, you need to have a livelihood as a reindeer herder, to have some kind of claim to the land. But in reality, all Sami who have the good fortune of still having strong roots are just as tied, no matter what you work with, to the land. And there is a very strong idea in the Swedish society of what a Sami is. I guess I break the norm in many ways. I'm tall, I have light hair, I'm not a man, I'm not a reindeer herder. So I show this picture of these tiny little guys in their traditional these dresses, because in one sense they represent what people think that Sami are. They're also from the northernmost area of the Sami territory, whereas I, for example, is from the south. But as I said, we're so diverse. We Sami, we have all the skin colors of the people on the planet, more or less. Because we love without borders. We have work on all kinds of jobs, of course. There are many that are reindeer herders. There are people who are hunters, fishers, but there's also graphic designers, artists. There are truck drivers. There are miners. There are professors. There's all kinds of Samis living. We aren't stuck in the 1800s. And we do not like to be treated as if we were stuck in the 1800s. So, some basic facts. there are somewhere about 20 to 60,000 Samis in Sweden. The only actual number we have is about 9,000 Samis who are registered to vote in the Saami Parliament's elections that are being held every 4th year. And to enroll to do that, you have to send in a form yourself. It's voluntary. And you have to fill out certain requirements. You have to self-identify as a Sami. And one of your parents has to be on the list already, or one of your parents or one of your grandparents has to have had Sami language as their language at home. So we try to keep it on language as a way to identify culture rather than meddling with blood or things like that. And on that note, we can also say that there used to be a time when we said someone is half Sami or a quarter Sami or something. If you identify as Sami, you are a Sami. You're not a half Sami. No one's a half person. You can be Sami and you can be Swedish, or you can be Australian, or you can be First Nation and Sami. There's really no trouble in that. The number 10% is of the usual estimate that it's 40,000 Samis living in Sweden today. In our statistics from the Saami Parliament, 4,900 people own a reindeer today. And to be able to graze your reindeers traditionally, you need to be a member of a Sami reindeer herding district or Sami village, if you translate it directly from Swedish Sameby, which is not actually a village, but a form of organization for reindeer herders that was constructed by the Swedish state. And they did this quite destructively back in the 20s. The law is actually from before that, but they enforced it harshly in the 20s when, we had a society where we have clans, more or less like clans. That's our traditional structure. And then people would use whatever resources that were rich. So, if there was a lot of fish, a big portion of the big family, not just parents, but also cousins and uncles and such, would fish. And there's a lot of other resources, and they would do that. And a lot of people needed in the reindeer herding, they would do that. But one day, the Swedish state said, those of you who are herding reindeer right now, you can continue. You can continue to hunt and fish and herd reindeer. The rest of you cannot. You are Swedish now. Assimilate into the society. You are not welcome to continue your traditions. And that cut like a knife through the Sami society, as the Sami professor Israel Rong said, which is very true, and it's apparent every day in Sami politics, because this law is still in action in Sweden. We are integrated into society, as I said, and 75% of us are still living in a traditional area based upon the electorate to the Sami Parliament. Sweden used to have statistics on us, but after doing a lot of funky things during or before the Second World War, they quit registering people on ethnicity, which is both good and bad, I guess, because it was horrid, but also it's used as a scapegoat today to not carry any statistics on the Sami. This is our traditional area, more or less. It might not be entirely correct on the Finnish side, but in Sweden it's more or less true. We are one people in 4 countries. We live in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. And there are findings of Sami, what's the name for it, where we've had our kohties, our traditional houses. Here in Uppsala, but even more south. But we've been pushed north by kings and queens and the governments throughout. We I've mentioned it, but indigenous peoples. I don't know if everyone here is aware of what that term means. It's the people that were there before a state was formed or colonized or people settled there. So it's not actually the first people there, but the ones who were present when someone else came in, such as what happened in Sweden. We were living here, and then Sweden created a country of our territory, amongst other areas. There was a term, I think, formed by the Pope back in the days, terra nullius, like unused lands. And that's a term that's been used globally to grab indigenous people's lands. No one was there before, so we took it. Yay for us. And they say that, for instance, Kiruna, it's a town, I don't know if you know it, it's a town in the north that is has the biggest mine in Sweden. An LKAB, it's state-owned. And they said that when the town was formed, no one was living there. It was deserted lands. This is Kiruna in 1906, before the town order. Just starting to build it. You can see it in the background. We were actually there. It was grazing lands and coughing lands for amongst other the reindeer herders in that area. Also lands used by Sami generally. So, the Swedish recognition of us as Sami people. In 1977, we were recognized by the Swedish Parliament. Then in 2011, they amended the constitution to include us as a people. They were for some reason scared of using the word indigenous people, so they used just people, which is actually stronger if you look at the international rights. So we do have a pretty good shot at sovereignty, but self-determination anyhow. To throw that out. And now the Nordic Sami Convention is hopefully going to come into action, but it's still unclear, and that was an attempt by the Nordic state to show the golden Nordic human rights abilities, or to like confirm to human rights, which has not really ended up being that. I think they're quite scared to do anything to better the Sami situation, but we're at least negotiating some kind of convention that would rule basic level for the Sami. I thought I would just mention indigenous peoples globally because there are some interesting things to say on it if you look at findings from other nations or peoples. We are 370 million. I mean, as I said, we're not many, the Sami are not many, but when we connect with other indigenous peoples, we form a great number. And it's a good comfort actually to have each other. We meet every year at the Permanent Forum on indigenous issues in the UN, for instance. We have somewhere around 5,000 people in over 72 countries. So, where is 80% of the biodiversity on Earth found? It's found on lands that are controlled by indigenous peoples, or is indigenous peoples' traditional territory governed, etc. by some coincidence. And it's not because we are better people than anyone else or anything like it, but if you have a living indigenous culture, you also have living indigenous values and traditions and ways to manage the lands that might not just be profit for large corporations, but people who have lived there for thousands of years, they want to continue to do it. They want to ensure that they can have a rich and fulfilling life, even in 100 years, or 7 generations, as some other indigenous people say. I thought I should show a photo of what's been happening in the province of Västerbotten, which is my home area. If you look at the big pictures, of course, everything is, but yeah, Västerbotten is. This is 1810. The white, and then the road comes. That's 1900. The road has started to come. Somewhere when they started really getting the interest up. They had it before. They came in the 1600s and tried to actually build churches to get people to abandon their religion and such. It's in recent years with the industrialism that most has happened. And then 1940 we have murals, and 2010. It's really, really, really hard for reindeer herders to have some kind of resilience in the land for their reindeers. The reindeer is a magnificent animal at using a very scarce resource. They can use something that hardly any other animal can and turn it into a lot of resources that we can use. But they need resilience in the land. It cannot be split up into tiny pieces. And if this is the roads, then you add everything else that's been going on. The towns, the fact that there's almost no old woods left, or anything else. We have a sad situation where we're seeing the effects of climate change. I mean, in my home area, some types of fish has become more scarce because the temperature has risen in the lake. Other areas, we have reindeer herding first telling us that to the Saami Parliament that, I mean, they used to never be bad winters here, but now they're suddenly starting to become bad winters. And bad winters for reindeer herders are, for example, when a lot of snow falls. Because the reindeer stop digging if it's over 1 meter, then they won't. They just wander instead. So they wander over vast areas. Or if, it's been happening in the middle of the winter, there are suddenly very warm degrees. Everything melts, forms an ice layer when it becomes cold again, and then it falls snow on top of that. The reindeers can't find food if the climate is like that, and they starve. And people are forced to feed them, but that's not always successful. And to round them up in that when they wandered away is also very difficult. So, Sami land rights in Sweden. Well, the Sami are not as a people considered to be an affected party when some exploitation is going to take place in our traditional area. They have to, the companies or the state has to take some consideration to the reindeer herders, but it's mostly aimed at looking at reindeer herding in financial measures. It's the impact it's creating in loss of coins that is being looked at, not in culture, not in everything around, not the fact that it might be just one of the person who's out herding, but a lot of people around it that are quite tied into it, and they also lose. So it's a very simplistic way of looking at reindeer herding and trying to reduce it to something that is just monetary. And all other Samis are simply left without. In Hemma-Tärnaby, there is a panned mine in Rönnbäcken that will be about the size of, slightly larger than the inner part of Stockholm. So entire Stockholm will disappear, more or less. It's a huge area, and it concerns a lake, or rather, where several creeks and larger rivers come together to form the beginning of Ume River, which is one of the great rivers flowing across Sweden. In that spot, in that water, a company wants to build a nickel mine. There's uranium and there's asbestos in the ground, yet they've got their permits to start the work, or at least look at it and carry on. And the local Samis have been protesting. The reindeer herders took it to the UN Committee on Racial Discrimination. The non-reindeer herders have also been trying to voice their concern. We have people living there that are not reindeer herders, but they've been fishing and living out of those waters for generations and generations, and they're not even allowed to come up in court and argue against this company. They're not considered an affected party at all. And neither are the Saami Parliament, so we can't really get into those situations. Then there's an idea, because as I showed you, the map of our traditional territory in Sweden is kind of big, 40 to 50% of the surface area of Sweden. So I even get phone calls from angry people that are like, but you control half of Sweden. Like, why do you not want development? It's like, well, we want development, but sustainable. But also we do not really control the area at all. We do not have any veto, we do not have any real influence over what's happening. I mean, the reindeer herders who are being called to meetings with these corporations, they're more or less just informed. They're asked to sit down, the company tells them what they're gonna do, and then the meeting is over. So, yeah, yay on Sweden for that. And I mean, the Saami Parliament, for instance, is funded on a year-by-year basis from the Swedish state. We're like standing there with a hat in our hands and kindly asking for them to fund us yet another year. And at the same time, we have like the mine I was talking about in Kiruna. Now it's not doing super well, but for many, many, many years, it produced 1 million kronor an hour in profit. At the same time, women were giving birth on the road to the next town because there were no functioning hospital in that town. So they had to drive 10 kilometers to give birth. So children were being born alongside that road. It's a state-owned mine. It's like the best example we have in Sweden of a mine that gives back. And it didn't give back. It doesn't give back to the local area. It doesn't give anything to the Sami. They tried for a while. They tried to work on the green infrastructure with us, which we're happy. Or they tried, at least, to be honest, they didn't work with us. They worked with the reindeer herding district in that area. And they built an ecoduct over the railway where they ship the iron ore to Norway. It was a great ecoduct. The trouble is that they constructed like this place where they take care of the railway carts next to it. So it's like a lot of noise and things going on, and no reindeer has ever used that ecoduct, of course. So, I mean, it doesn't really go the entire way, not even the best cases. So, I mean, we could fund a lot by ourselves if we got a small portion of the resources that are being shipped out of our traditional area, but we don't have any say in it. So, the Saami Parliament. I've been talking about it, but now I'm going to get to it. We are 31 people elected every fourth year, to the Saami Parliament, just like the Swedish Parliament or something, but smaller and not on the same dates. The elections are not on the same dates. And then we meet, we form a board, which is like the government with no ministers, but we have responsibilities to various people in the board, and then we have the president of the board, and the speaker of the parliament and such. And different committees. We have a language committee, which I chair. We have an industry committee, or livelihoods we could call it, because that's more true. Then we have a reindeer herding committee, because the Saami Parliament has such responsibilities over that issue that we tell it that way. Right now at least. And a cultural committee. We were established in 1993, more or less following the Alta conflict in Norway, where Norway wanted to build a huge hydropower facility and dam, a big dam, and cover a lot of Sami lands in water without even talking to the Sami beforehand. So it turned into a massive protest, and people went on hunger strike in front of the parliament in Oslo and such. That movement actually created the Saami Parliament in Norway, Finland, and also Sweden. But Sweden chose an interesting approach to the Saami Parliament. In the proposition to the government, they said that it's not supposed to be a mechanism for Sami self-determination, but we're allowed to monitor the Sami issues and give input to the government. So we're a state agency which employs about 50 people. And they are it's interesting because they're partly ruled by us, the politicians of the Sami Parliament elected by the people every 4th year. But they're also ruled by the Swedish state. Our 50 people staff do not have an easy time, and none of them are actually working as some kind of political secretary or something. They're doing their job with the issues that they're given, which was given to the Sami Parliament from other government agencies that had those tasks at the time. For instance, some things concerning the reindeer herding, and we have some parts concerning language and such. And yeah, the Parliament. So, a little bit about what we do in the Sami Parliament. Well, I told you we go to UN conferences. We meet with other indigenous peoples. We meet with the Sami parliaments over nations. We also create various programs, political programs. We have Välinbyras, which is our environmental program, or as we call it, a living environment program. We have Arbetieto, which is the Sami word for traditional knowledge, which is our program concerning that. We have our mineral extraction program. We have wind power, etc., etc. Because what happens, the sustainable future that Sweden is envisioning is building, for instance, a lot of new windmills. And where are they placing them? They're placing them on Sami lands without our consent. And they're not small, and they're not put there in some very nice, considerate, sustainable way, but they're rather blowing the tops out of mountains. They're building huge roads, they're fencing huge areas where we are not allowed anymore. And that's how Sweden is going to take the step into the renewable future. It's by acting the same way as they've more or less always had, and moving a step further to eradicate the Sami people. We want a sustainable future. We want to fight climate change, but we want to do it together, not by someone running over us and destroying the possibility, for instance, for young reindeer herders to take over because the lands are shrinking and shrinking. Where are they going to feed their reindeers? And I mean, there's a lot of research going on, not a lot, but some at least going on this issue, and shows that reindeers do not want to come closer than 3 kilometers to a windmill. They make a lot of strange sounds that they're not used to, and they're quite sensitive beings. But I'm sure that we could find sites where we could have them built, but then we would actually need to talk to each other, and we would need some kind of platform to have that discussion. And since this election, we've actually had a much better relationship with the government. We've met the minister responsible for some issues many times, and we've had good meetings, the best I've ever been a part of having with a government representative. But we haven't really moved forward on the actual issues. Hopefully, we will reach somewhere where we at least get to having a formalized consultation or some kind of formalized idea of how do we meet, and when the government is proposing something that concerns the Sami, how do we get involved? How do they talk to us first? And what we're asking for is nothing more than sitting down, talking in good faith, and trying to find a solution we can agree on. We're not even asking for a veto, but it would be very nice to talk. I'm sure we can find a way forward. I'm not sure that talking will do it or work on the mineral extraction part. Now the prices have gone down, they might be on the way up, but I mean, for a while there were 500 exploration permits given on Saami lands. That's people in all parts of Sápmi on the Swedish side worrying, will my traditional lands be left for the next generation, or will they be a huge mining pit? Will there only be gravel left? Because the people talk about it being able to reverse and go back when they close a mine. And most of those 500 permits were for gold mines. The industry does not need any more gold. We have gold already taken up for several hundred years of what the industry needs. It's for profit. It's for people getting richer. And the average lifespan, according to the industry's own numbers, is 8 years of a gold mine. And then they leave. And then it's poisoned and destroyed. And the storybook is gone. Our environmental program says that we want a resilient and sustainable Sami environment, living environment for all. But also, I mean that we want to both the culture and the nature to be experienced as enriching for the surrounding world. We're really not interested in excluding anyone. We're really not interested in doing what people have been doing to us. We want to live together. We want to have a strong society in the north of Sweden, in our traditional lands, and across the borders. And we need to do that together. And we have some concrete ideas that I haven't gone through of how to do that. And I went to the North Pole in 2013 together with a group of other young indigenous peoples to spread awareness of climate change and destructive industries in the Arctic. And it was pretty amazing. It was me, and there was Remy, who's like 2-meter tall guy from the Seychelles that more or less never stood on skis before, and at least never lived in minus 30 degrees for 2 weeks, as we did. People from all over, and it was beautiful. And it truly, I mean, it is a global issue. And if we tie back to the fact that 80% of the biodiversity is found on lands that are governed by indigenous peoples, I mean, what we've been doing throughout, because with some variation it's always changed, is building resilient systems to take care of the land and to live on them. If you take examples from South America, the World Bank, for instance, writes about this, and the 80% number is from a report from the World Bank in 2008, that lands that are given to govern by indigenous peoples are better conservated or better taken care of than the neighboring sites that are not managed by indigenous peoples. I mean, view that as you want, but it might be something to our principles, and it might be something we're using. If you want to read more about the Saami Parliament or Saami issues, these are a couple of links. And I think we'll go for coffee now, and then I hope you have a lot of questions for me. Thanks.
So maybe we can take a break for around 10 minutes, so maybe we can start back at 10 past.
I think it's But then everywhere else, it's like, I cannot fathom. No, I just don't make a blood draw. You it's in your hair. But is it? Yeah, absolutely. No, see, yeah, I'm like, I can't think of everything. I'm told no.
Hi.
And I don't know what the question was, but the answer was ice. Oh, it was like World War II.
Hey, how are you? Yeah.
Like April 1940, Norway and Denmark were attacked by Germany. Why? We had to do it during my Sweden, but they came to Norway. And he was like, why don't they just take another ball? He's like, yeah. Everyone just like laughed. And like he was like, so he just kept saying ice. It was like, and then after like 5 minutes of him saying ice and just laughing, and then he's like, Scotland, what was it? He's like, ice. Yeah, I feel like during the game. Yeah. And then I realized he was like, watching me. Spanish so far. Oh, yeah, that's what a novella is. I was like, telenovela. A Jedi! I heard about it. Oh, yeah. Is this Nobel conference relating to the topic, or do they talk about economics, or is it like the addiction, or they're like, hey, addiction is oh, it's something about finding security, financial security. Yeah, man. Det var för många frågor som jag var I was really like throwing out all my cards. And I was like, hi, I'm a genius studying economics. I expert math words. And it's to grow in a unique way. Can I get some info on that bitch? And then I put commas to bitch. It's like also agriculture for one, and also like I get some info on that bitch. No, I just like how many students typically get a year? I was getting worried no, now like looking at like how many students generally. Get you. I wonder what was higher. Apparently they were not prepared for Walker being Walker. Like I did. Yeah, right? That's very accurate. Yeah, I was like asking all sorts of stuff. I finally like could be like be quiet, and I was like, I'm ready for you now. I've got one. I was asking. Oh! Yeah, when I was doing my
Oh yeah, Jessie.
Hello?
She's coming tomorrow, right?
Yes.
Is she doing this like Alright, that's really nice. Yeah, relaxing.
Yeah, and I just saw people like, okay, you guys are wearing the same speaker for tomorrow. And so I don't know if they shared the same speaker. I don't know if they were about to because it might be
Yeah, I learned a lot of things.
focus more on
Som skulle verkligen ha bara totalt hoppat över det här. Och att det är så här,
Cioè dici, collegate con loro, potresti farlo con popolazioni indigene in Italia. Cioè, a meno che non vai a prendere i sassi. Serve quelli di. No, cioè se posso farlo io, se riesco a farlo passo il ma anche le Seychelles, con tizio delle Seychelles sembrerebbe una fesseria. No, ma io lo farei più con i Sami, che ho... il mio sogno è farmi una primavera, andare con loro a fare quando fanno la raccolta delle renne. La raccolta delle renne? Sì, perché le renne sono in stato brado e poi ogni tanto le raccolgono e le separano dai branchi, quelli che servono per macellare, ma è una tecnica, ma vanno in primavera, perché presto l'anno sono libere per macellare e ovviamente macellano se le mangiano. È l'unica loro fonte di sostentamento. E tra l'altro tipo la loro sono al museo, la loro storia della creazione verso dalla renna, la renna è tutto.
Io risentirò perché voglio andare in Lapponia, vorrei fare qualcosa che appunto non sia uno scempio per loro e non sia una roba che...
Cioè, a me piacerebbe, però devi riuscire a entrare cioè è difficile secondo me riuscire a vedere i veri Sami, perché ad esempio questa cosa con le renne uno si immagina...
No, ma io vorrei solo chiedergli a lei se mi facesse, se c'è qualcuno che può ospitarmi per qualche giorno, stare là a dormire e fare guardare una mano a qualcosa, non so.
when you see the first games were crying.
How's it going? Are you enjoying it?
Yeah, I'm really happy.
Yeah,
I think tomorrow we will have more or less the same lecture.
Oh, really?
Just to give show what the nations, how big the nation is. So there was this
And is it like most people in the house?
Yeah,
and
quite happy.
to see what it is.
And you saw the Northern Lights?
And not so much.
Installation guy, or I see posted on there.
Yeah. Because I'm living out, I'm living and so it's a good place.
Yeah.
I was going out when the moment is perfect, but I see nothing. Maybe with camera and so it's better.
Okay, yeah, but then it's not so interesting.
Yeah.
Then you can just look at the
Yeah.
photo anyway. Yeah, I always seem to miss it. I missed it last year as well.
Okay.
In the tourist industry or something like that.
Maybe I try and get the seats to you know.
I don't know.
And the upper lines might be.
Jag vet, jag har också
I don't know if you can add yeah. Oh, do you really got it? Why?
I forgot to say something before. I had a question for you guys. I don't know how aware you are of some parts of the Sami history, but how many of you know about the Carolina Rediviva library? Have you been there? You know what's in the basement related to some issues? It's the archive of the Swedish Racial Biology Institute. So I have a large part of my family's skull measures comprehend them in a paper lying in that basement, alongside photos of them naked, because a Swedish professor at the Uppsala University and the Swedish state-funded Swedish Racial Biology Institute that started up in 1922, traveled throughout Sweden and the Sami area to document the Sami and measure their heads to find proof that they were a lower standing species than that we were prone to certain abilities such as being lazy and stupid and somewhat of a half-human. He did not find anything that could prove this, but his ideas traveled to Germany and were a big part of forming the Nazi government and their ideas concerning human races. So, I mean, that's also an interesting plot twist to me being here speaking at Uppsala University. I use almost the same thing, or like how it ties back to when I was asked by the Swedish state to speak on one of their events. And the Swedish state was forcibly sterilizing Sami women up until the 1970s, for being Sami. So, I mean, my mom is born in 1944. She lived through many years of that being a possibility. So I'm kind of glad to be here. I'm kind of glad to be able to speak to you. Yeah, that was sad. But do anyone have any questions? We've been speaking a lot during the break, but don't feel shy to ask. Yes.
Yes, well, I am interested in history, and I was wondering if you know about this, if you know when was the first time that when was the first time that other people who came to Scandinavia got in contact with Sami people? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's pretty hard to say because in the south I think we've been living alongside for a pretty long time. But I know that I think when was it he visited us? That was mighty long ago. We've had like explorers come throughout the year from the Roman Empire, for instance. And there is a story. We were pretty early on to both invent skis. There's a joke in the Sami community saying that we were the first ones to invent skis and the first ones to stop using them. In came the snowmobiles. But also we were quite, we started building boats very early. And I know some scientists are speaking about that, and I don't know how true it is, that we taught Vikings to build boats. So no, I do actually not know, but we've been also in trading and such for a very long time, so it's been a multicultural society in one sense.
Yeah, but yeah, that was my question. If it's possible to see it in archaeological or historical records when contacts began or how yeah how these contacts appear to be between Sami people and others, for example, the so-called Svea who live in the south of Sweden.
Yeah, I wish I could give you a better answer. I mean, from what you can see, for instance, and I'm sure there are historians that can give you excellent answers. I'm just not one of them. I'm a poor politician. But if you look at, for instance, the Sami costume and the buttons and the silver that's on them, that's usually medieval silver and symbolics from that time that we are still using. We started trading with them and we liked it. And people didn't like to carry big purses. Instead, they carried their valuables, their money as things on themselves. So you can usually see like small bags that we had that were there were hundreds of little rings on them, and you could use that little ring out of brass or silver or something as a coin instead. But you had sewn them on. So yeah, the silver at least is pretty old. That's from that time, or from a time long ago. Yeah. Oh. We will start from this direction and move.
I have a kind of complicated question, at least for me as a biologist, but it's two in one. Because I wonder how it is. I know I am tired of this question about political question about wolves, and in this discussion, you often hear that wolves are the opinion of the Sami people is the same as the reindeering people. It is those very close tied, and with the wolf question, it's an important question to me because there is like the environmental question not going hand in hand with the question about people, the Sami people rights, if I get it right. But is that only the picture that the media is showing, or is this true?
Yeah, I can say about that issue from certain aspects. I mean, yeah, reindeer herders are Sami in Sweden. And of course, there's a lot of reindeer herders in Saami Parliament. There are specific parties dedicated only to moving forward the issues for reindeer herders, for instance, and we work together. Even though I represent people who are mostly hunting and fishing, or from that background, we're working in various trades. But trouble with wolves, from a Sami perspective, is, well, traditionally, the fact that the wolf scatters the reindeer. You try to hold them together so that you can watch over them. They graze freely. I mean, if you were going to fence them and feed them hay, you could just as well have cows. That would be much more resource efficient. The point is to keep the tradition going of reindeer herding and using this limited resource, that you need them to walk freely. But you keep them in certain areas and watch over them. And if a wolf comes in, they get really scared and they run in all directions. And you've got a huge problem on your hands. And if you bring that into modern context with what I showed you, for instance, with the roads, you understand that it's so limited areas where reindeer herders today can graze their reindeers. So there's impossible situation if they're also supposed to deal with the wolves when they're trying to keep their reindeers like squashed in between a huge road and a town and a mine, and then standing on that tiny little area and in comes the wolves. So I mean, it's becomes a matter of what you want to prioritize. Do you want the windmills there? Do you want the mine there? Do you want the wolves there? Because we can't really carry all of it.
It does not go hand in hand with reindeer.
No. We don't want to exterminate animals, really. We do not. But it becomes very problematic when we get them in the traditional area. So, I mean, there is a Swedish policy today that there are not it's not allowed for the wolves to stay permanent in the reindeer herding area and form revir. Territories. Wolf territories inside of the traditional reindeer herding area, because we have very high numbers of all kinds of predators today, which in part is very good and in part is very troubling for reindeer herding, because some reindeer herding districts lose up to 50% of their calves every year to predators, and it makes it really hard to live off reindeer herding if 50% must dissipate by that. Yeah. I hope it was a satisfying answer. But, yes.
Has the Samis a language of their own, and if so, how long back in history?
The Sami languages, there are several, are Finno-Ugric, so they're very different to Swedish. The Swedish language, for instance, which is a Germanic language, like English and Norwegian and Icelandic and such. We're more related to Hungarian and Finnish and the small Siberian languages. And we have 4 Sami languages in Sweden now: South, Rume, Lule, and North Sami. And well, how long they've existed, again, I'm sadly not an historian, but they are distinct languages with the differences in between the languages is if you're in an area that is very close from the border between Lule and North, for instance, it's more or less pretty much Swedish and Danish, perhaps. But if you come from the South Sami area and you talk to someone from the North Sami area, it can easily become like Swedish and Icelandic. Maybe this doesn't say anything to those of you who do not speak Swedish. I'm sorry. But if I give an example, like the word chichi in South Sami, it means mother. And in North Sami, it means tits. And if you get enough of those things wrong, or it can become pretty interesting sentences. And also, I mean, there are a lot of grammatical differences. Yeah. There was a lady behind you who had a question.
Yeah, my question is more about what you were talking about. It's clear that you're really displeased with the way the Swedish government is handling the Sami situation.
Sorry, what did you say?
That you're displeased how the Swedish government is handling.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying was clear.
Yes, the entire Saami Parliament is very displeased. Yes, with the Swedish government, sadly, because, as I said, we've had good discussions, but the history isn't very great. And so, like I said during the break to someone who asked this, I mean, it's still a very racist society in the north of Sweden today. If I take off my clothes and dress like a normal Swede and speak Swedish, there's not much of a trouble. But if I wear this and go out in certain areas, I could easily get in trouble. We have lots of situations of people being spat at or abused, or all kinds of situations, children bullied in school still, because they're Sami. And the more obvious your Saminess is, the more trouble you can get into. And this, I mean, it feeds itself because Sweden isn't teaching anything about Samis in school, which, I mean, doesn't better the situation and lets those old ideas continue to live in the north. In the south it's better, but in the north they're still prevails. And it also affects whenever we're trying to discuss with the government. Last year I had a meeting with the head of the environmental department on the Swedish government, and she did not know that the Saami Parliament was a government agency and a parliament elected by the people. We thought we were some kind of NGO, like the cycling society of Uppsala or something. So it's really hard to keep a good discussion with the government when they have more or less no idea who you are and what you're talking about. So you have to start with explaining, I mean, very basic facts. Hello, we are the Sami people. We are indigenous people. The UN Declaration on Indigenous People's Rights and such.
Yeah, my question was actually like, what do you see like further happening? Do you want your Sami Parliament to have more influence?
Oh yeah.
In the Swedish government?
Okay, sorry, I didn't get that.
Yeah.
Yes. We would want responsibility over a lot of more issues. Cultural heritage, language, land issues and such. Not to discriminate, but I mean, we have the right to self-determination on these issues. So yes, we do not have an interest to form a state of our own. There is no movement to have a Sami police. But there is actually a really interesting discussion going on with the provinces in the north to form a health center for the Sami where we can build knowledge about Samis related to health, psychological health and other things, just to ensure that the medical practitioners also know a bit more than they do currently. All right, we'll move up this direction, so we'll start with you.
And you started to mention some political change that you would like to see happening.
Yeah.
But in your opinion, what is the most important political decisions that need to be made now?
Well, there's a long-standing point that the ILO 169 convention should be ratified and implemented in Sweden. It's a convention on indigenous rights with the aim to ensure that indigenous peoples are not discriminated. And Sweden has refused to implement it, and there is a lot of scaremongering concerning it, that it will give the Sami people the veto right to the entire north of Sweden, and that we will use it to throw out all of the Swedes, shut down everything. It doesn't give us those rights. That's not what it is. It's some basic principles about consultation, to be consulted, language, health, other issues like that. Very basic, very minimum rightsy things. So I think that would be a good start to get that in place, or the Nordic Convention, or like some basic level of rights for the Sami people in Sweden, except for the two laws that we've got, which is the Reindeer Act and the Saami Parliament Act. And then there's, I mean, tied into this National Minority Language Act as well, but so, and then the consulting with the government, getting a better say in the mining issues and the other land rights issues, ensuring that kids today get the ability to learn Sami language in schools. I mean, my grandmother's generation were beaten by teachers if they spoke Sami in schools, so they stopped. There's a lot of, a friend of mine didn't learn Sami from her parents, and she asked them why, and her father said, I didn't want to cause you that much harm, because it was a very, very negative thing. So people try to protect their kids and didn't teach them Sami. And now, when the situation is different, a lot of kids want to learn it again. It's really, really, really important to know the Sami language, to Sami, for many people at least. But it's still not possible in Sweden today. Kids on average get 45 minutes a week in schools, and you do not learn a language by 45 minutes a week. And then, and that's after parents struggling for months to get that for their kids. It's like no teachers that are being educated to teach some either. So it's a shitty situation, but we're having good discussions with Gustav Fridolin, the minister responsible for this. So hopefully we will get something rolling. But again, it's a struggle. Yes.
Yes, I wonder if the regulation around reindeer racing. My understanding is that there are some quotas for each sameby or something. How many animals they can have.
Yes.
But I also wonder internally in the Sami village, how do they regulate how many reindeers each one of them can have? If there is an overall cap on the number of reindeers, how do you socially within the community determine that, well, you can have 200 and you can have 700, because they don't have equally many reindeers? So is it based on history, or what is the mechanism within the community?
Well, I'm not a reindeer herdder, as I said, and I'm mostly working on other issues, so I'm not an expert on this. But they have a board within the Sami villages, we call them that, as their organizations, and the board decides. Sweden enforced a law saying that on these issues you vote by the number of reindeers you have, like stocks. If you own a lot of stocks, you get a big say. If you own a lot of reindeers, you get a big say. It's not like it was in the old time where we never voted really, but we used consensus. We sat around the fire and talked until we agreed. Now this other law is in place. So it's decided by the board, and it's an individual decide. Also, it changes between the different villages, so it's not really a general rule. But also, reindeers aren't really livestocks. You can't really know what's going to happen with them from year to year. It could come a wolf, there could come something. One of the biggest predators we have right now in the Sami territory is the railway. There isn't a functioning fence alongside most of the railway, and the reindeer do not recognize the train as a threat as it would others. So they can die by huge numbers, actually, on the railway today, sadly. What you have one year might not be what you have the next, and someone might be more successful. Yes. Okay, we take the young gentleman here, and then the lady in coral. Should we say? Okay. Yes.
You kind of answered my question already, because I think Norway signed this convention, maybe that we talked about.
Yes.
And I know that in Norway the language policy is, for example, much better for Sami language, right? Could you maybe compare it? What is the difference?
Yeah, absolutely. The Saami Parliament in Norway has 12 times the budget we have. They've signed ILO 169. They have a commission in place in the northernmost region where everyone is welcome to put forward their claims to the land, and they will settle, all right, this person has used this traditionally, so it belongs to this person. It's not a perfect system, but at least it's something that is in place. They have much better language laws. I did something marvelous once in my life. I moved to Kautokeino or Kautokeino in the north of Norway, where it's a Sami majority city. Everyone should go there. It's so different from most places in Sweden. And if I compare it to where I grew up, I was almost provoked by how Sami it was and how openly the Saminess was in the community. And they have, you can go from kindergarten to a university degree all in Sami. in Sweden you have 45 minutes a week, if you're lucky. So it's a huge, huge difference. Well, to be honest, there are 5 Sami schools from grades 1 to 6, but that's 5 schools. There's a lot of it's needed. More schools are needed. Anyhow, so generally it's a much better situation in Norway. Some things are maybe not that great, and the current government with the Fremskrittspartiet isn't the best government if we like that's ever been. So they're slashing a lot of budgets for the Sami. They've been trying to close the Sami school. They've more or less just settled into moving around money rather than giving anything more, and more is needed to the Sami Parliament. Yes.
First of all, I just want to thank you for a fantastic presentation. It's very, very interesting. Last year I visited the festival in Yoko. That was the first time when I learned about Sami culture. And I was so impressed how little you can actually learn about like anything related to Sami when you're living more to south, like in Uppsala or in Stockholm. So it's very interesting and to have you and to hear from a person who is Sami. And my question was actually very similar to the one the young gentleman asked about other countries' policies about Sami, also Finnish.
I can say something about the Finnish policies, perhaps, and Russia. Well, Finland were on the verge of implementing ILO 169 as well, but then for the first time ever, anything like it had happened, it failed, and no opposition to the government had failed in that way before, so they were like standing completely unaware of what to do. So it's in limbo right now. It's still in limbo. It was an election, and they're undecided of what to do right now, and I don't think they will be able to push it through government. In Finland, both Finnish majority society people and Samis are allowed to herd reindeer. And in Finland, something that's better than in Sweden and Norway is that, well, they've dedicated a specific area as the traditional Sami area, and it's not actually the Sami traditional area because it's smaller, but they have stronger land rights there. At least when you connect it to mining, they have more or less a veto over new mines in that area, and it's still a pretty big area, so that's good. And they, as in the Saami Parliament. And the situation for Samis in Russia is pretty bleak. Recently there was a law, I think it was, at least something from the not from Putin, from the Russian government, that everyone, all indigenous organizations that take funding from outside of Russia are considered foreign agents. So indigenous peoples are considered foreign agents in Russia. And it's very hard for them to organize. They're usually, or not usually, but it happens that the government comes in and tries to elect representatives for indigenous organizations themselves, instead of letting the indigenous peoples choose amongst their own. And when we had the World Conference at the UN on indigenous issues, several of the Russian participants had their cars almost hijacked when they were driving to the airport. They had like people stopping their cars, trying to pull their bags out at the airport. People tried to steal their passports. It was like a really bad movie. And finally they made it. But it's unbelievable that things like that happen. When I was in the youth council some years ago, I was very unaware of the situation. And we have a mining protest going on in Sweden, in Gallok. And I emailed the leader of the youth Sami organization in Russia, "Do you want to join? This is happening," on Facebook. And a couple of days later, she was called into interrogation by the FSB. So, I mean, it sorted out okay for her, but it's pretty scary. So it's really hard for them to organize. We have a joint body for the Saami Parliament, where we meet and discuss regularly. And we have Russian Samis that are welcome as observers. And in reality, we try to be there as equals, but it's just very hard for them to organize. Gentleman and that lady behind.
Hi, thank you. I would like to ask something about your culture and the most dominant culture, because you say before with correct way we don't want to assimilate to 18th century, and how you manage this with the modern culture, what you want be. I don't know if I express in a very good way. The problem of the input that's coming from European normal culture and what you want to preserve of your culture.
Yeah. Well, as long as we're leading the development as ourselves, instead of having it pushed on us, then I don't see any problem. I mean, reindeer herding today isn't done usually with skis or by foot. It's done with four-wheel drives and snowmobiles and even our helicopters. So as an example, we don't hunt with bow and arrow anymore. We use guns. And, a lot of people are vegetarian as well. They might not have survived back in the day. I mean, if you're a living culture, you change. And the only important part is that shame pushed on you from the outside shouldn't be like a factor in how much you keep of the traditions from the past and how much you listen to your elders, for example. At the same time as there's a lot of good and bad things coming, and there's always been shifts. The Sami culture that we see today in what is considered traditional and what is values from the elders might not actually be values from their elders. For instance, by the forced christening of the Sami people, I mean, when the Roman explorer, Tacitus, I think, was up to our region, he wrote, "What strange people this is, with no kings and queens and men and women hunting alongside." And then we move into just a couple of generations, or one generation ago, or even my mom, that was forced out of hunting because her uncles thought it was inappropriate for a woman to hunt. Nowadays, they understand that if she and I are not allowed, then who's going to do it? And that was very stupid of them. But it was prevalent for a while. It was reality for a while that we adopted those views. Yes?
My question was about the language. I wanted to know what's being done to make sure that it's continued being a native language within the household. Like, are there any immersion schools in Sweden?
Well, we're working on it. The Saami Parliament is trying to hold short-term immersion courses and such, and we're trying to push for the Sami schools to be, because they are a separate government agency, but there's also a Sami board too that we elect. But not even they are using a good full immersion method. So I mean, we've adopted a language policy, political language policy very recently, where we're trying to push for this and trying to push for the government to ensure funding for us to educate teachers and to change, because in normal or majority society schools, there is a rule that not more than 50% is allowed to be in any other language than Swedish. So we couldn't do full immersion, which is to have all of the lessons in Sami, which is really what you need, because it isn't good enough to be able to say, hi, do you want some coffee? You also need to be able to talk about mathematics and biology in Sami if we're going to preserve the language. But I don't know if that is what you wanted.
Yeah, I think it's just like what steps or what's being done to try and preserve it.
Yeah, well, there is, I mean, what's one part of it is of course forcing Sweden to fund and take responsibility for the Sami languages. It's more or less majority society that forced them away, and we need funding to be able to ensure that it's given in schools. But we also need attitudes to change. And that's something that some municipalities are doing a really good job at. They're realizing that they need to educate all the teachers on the staff about Sami issues, because it's not enough if they give the kids the right to go to the language classes if the other teachers are having the attitude of, what are you doing, why are you learning that language, and it's entirely worthless, which is sadly the case in the north of Sweden a lot of times. And in reality, there is a huge need to hire people with language skills. We need journalists, we need teachers, we need researchers, we need from all kinds of, I mean, it's this, if you want a job, learn Sami. I guarantee you will be hired. You will not go unemployed.
Where if someone wanted to learn Sami here in Uppsala, where would you go?
There are courses actually here in Uppsala also. I think they're mostly at distance courses, but there's the university here, it's the university in Umeå, there are universities, the one in Bodø in Norway also gives classes. I think also on distance. Yes.
I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess that some people used to practice shamanism before, which probably was suppressed in the Swedish government for a while. Is it coming back nowadays, and if yes, do you have any backup shamanism?
That's a tricky question. I mean, first of all, yes, we had an animistic or shamanistic religion, the whole Sami religion. People were burned alive for practicing it. I have a relative myself that was sentenced to death for practicing it. But then it went really underground, and there are traces of it that are still parts of people's everyday lives, how you view nature, how you view life, things like that, and certain traditions. And in some areas there are certainly people who are considered something of the sort, but it's not really openly spoken about. Yes.
There's a lot of issues covered, all really interesting, but at the start it was mentioned you did work on LGBT plus issues, so I was wondering if you could tell us more about that instance.
Well, yes. Being a queer woman myself, I felt it was really needed in the Saami Parliament. So I wrote a motion to the Parliament about us funding spaces for Sami LGBT youth to meet and educating ourselves and our staff on these issues. And then we went and walked in the Pride Parade, officially from the Sami Parliament, and it's been happening a few years more after that. And a lot of good things on this topic has since happened, and it's not at all actually part of what I have done, but it's just surfaced from various different sources. So it's been, the Queer in Sápmi project is marvelously amazing, which was two non-Sami women who started a project in cooperation with the Sami youth organization Sami Parliament, telling the stories of queer or LGBTQI Sami people and letting them tell their own stories, and it's really good, and I recommend you look it up if you're interested. And this other Sami Parliament has followed on this issue and funded. There was a Saami prayer organization for a while and funded that and funded some Saami Pride festivals and such. Yes. Yes, but there was a lady behind you.
I was wondering, what was the Sami perspective on all the new Swedish society challenges, such as integration of the newcomers? I think on the language, it might actually be it seems to me that they might be treating the same way with the modern small pedagogue.
Yes. Yes.
But I was wondering, how do you as a Sami look into the new challenges of Sweden?
Okay. I had a really sad/interesting/funny phone call a while ago from a very angry man from Skåne, from south of Sweden, who was like, "How many immigrants are you accepting in the Sami villages? Are you doing your job?" And more like, you could hear that he was a racist. He wanted to I don't know what he wanted to say. Probably complain about that there's too many immigrants coming to his part of Sweden. I was like, but the Sami villages are reindeer herding organizations. They're not actual places. And he was like, but how many are you accepting? I was like, but it's like if you're asking Volvo how many immigrants they're accepting. But it's a company. Like, yeah. Yeah. No, but from our perspective, our area has for such a long time been a multicultural society, and it's one of the beauties of it. And we've been able, for the most part of it, to live very peacefully side by side and profit and grow from each other. And if I look to my home area, the only reason to why my home municipality is still somewhat functioning is because of people that has moved in and asylum seekers and others. They've been unbelievably valuable in our region. So, and it's also, yes, language are probably treated very similar. Sometimes, we had a school in Lycksele that prohibited any other language than Swedish to be spoken during the breaks to, attempt to assimilate the kids, which turned out really bad when they prohibited Sami kids from talking to each other in Sami as well. Yeah. But anyhow, just that the basic ideas, not only on language, but in general, is kind of, the word tolerance isn't good. But somewhere respect perhaps is the word that we're talking about. And if we're asking for respect to be us, it would be very strange if we wouldn't respect others to be who they are. And if they need to come here to survive, then who are we to send them away? Yeah.
So I guess most people would agree that Sweden is a pretty progressive country. Can you elaborate on your view on why Sweden is not granting so many rights to Sami, being such a progressive country?
Yes, Sweden is great when it comes to other indigenous peoples as well, usually. But then they forget that they have indigenous peoples at home. And I think this is generally the case, that it's so easy to be good concerning others. And it's really difficult when it's on your home turf and you're risking to lose money. I think history plays into this a lot, and the fact that Sweden has never really dealt with its history. We need, I think, a truth commission, something that we're pushing for. Just to run through what has been going on in this history and how do we ensure that it doesn't happen again when it comes to the Sami treatment of the Sami people. And I think they're afraid it will cost too much, or that they do not have the political mandate to do it at home, or something like that. as I said, the northern part of Sweden is still pretty racist. And there's a lot of representatives in the parliament that is from that area, from our area. And they're not Sami. There's not one single Sami person in the Swedish parliament. There's not one single Sami person on the Swedish government. So, I mean, and the issues that they think we are up against and that we will only say no, no, no to, forestry, mining, etc., multi-billion industries. So, I guess that also plays into it. Yeah.
So I want to know what's the core of your cultural identity. Because
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
What's the core of your cultural identity? Do you understand?
No.
Culture.
Oh,
Yeah.
what's the core? Yeah, the core of the cultural identity.
Because I understand that sometimes there can be some shifts, you can have some adaptations, but what's that thing that keeps you together?
Yeah. I think so. Of course, a difficult question. In some parts, it's language, but then it's been stolen from so many. In some parts, it's the livelihoods, reindeer herding, hunting and fishing, which ties back to the land and our values connected to the lands. But then again, the basis of it, I think, is the traditional definition of who the Sami are, which is related to family. And we know the families. And like, first question you will get is, whose kids are you? And then you start nesting and you find out after you've been talking for a while, we're related! And after you've done that for a while, you realize that you have to marry outside of the Sami community because you're related to everyone. But we have a lot of words for like uncle. There are different words for uncles and aunts and such, just to keep things clean, so you don't like accidentally marry too close all the time. But I think that societal, the feel of a society is really key. I think, but I haven't really, yeah, I might have to think about that. You and
you said that it was a German family who has moved into a village.
Yeah.
How do they adapt to your village? How do they work together with your village?
My grand uncles love them. They love them so much I sometimes get jealous. Because I mean, my granduncles have been really good at like taking them under their wings and like, I mean, the economics up there is trade, more or less. You don't pay anyone to do anything, but you give and you give back. So I mean, and that's worked really well, and they're really, really nice people. So yeah, I'd say that they're pretty much fully part of the village and very appreciated parts of the village. So, I agree in that as well. So, yeah. Yes.
I wonder about the forestry, the modern forestry. I understand that it has affected reindeer keeping, some winter grazing, but I'm less clear about the hunting and the fishing, how it affects your livelihoods. And also the second follow-up question is, have you seen any real improvement from the FSC certification of sustainable forestry, etc., which is supposed to respect indigenous people's rights? Has their practices really changed?
Yeah. Again, I haven't worked super much on the forestry issues, like in relationship to reindeer herding. So the last question I might not be the perfect one to ask. I know that we are working very hard on geese systems or like mapping systems, where the reindeer herders on their side maps what areas they need and what resources they view as valuable, and the forestry companies, for instance, map what they would like to do, and then those two group sit and talk and tries to find a solution that's been fairly successful. But far from perfect or where we would want it to be. Forestry, in general, yes, of course it affects everyone, depending on what you do. There are the modest cases, and then there are the extreme cases like contorta, which is a foreign species of pine, I think, pine tree, that is being brought into Sweden, and it creates very different forests from the native species. They are very, they grow very close together, and they change the bottom of the forest floor, so there are no berries, there are no nothing, only grass grows there. So you can't pick berries, you can't move in those forests really, not reindeer and not hunters and no one, and it's not possible to recognize what once were there. So of course things like that is worrisome. Yes.
What is your perspective on tourism? Because pictures of Sami are exploited in tourism advertising, but at the same time, I guess it's a business opportunity.
Yes. We have the extreme cases and the good cases, where we have some Samis that are making good livelihoods out of tourism. We have some tourist companies that are non-Sami that are doing a great job of working together with the Samis or treating the land in a good way or just building a sustainable business and showing that alternatives are possible on our lands that are non-destructive. There are fairly good amount of those examples, which we are very happy about. But then on the other side, and this is mostly the case for Finland, we have companies that employ non-Sami people to dress up in fake costumes, to smear their faces with stuff, so they look dirty and pretend to be drunk and take tourists on invented Sami traditions. So in Finland you can buy a tour where you go and do the traditional Sami crossing of the polar circle ceremony. So, I mean, I have a friend that works in Santa Park and used to work in Santa Park in Rovaniemi, and they sell a lot of fake handicraft there. Some handicraft is actually moved into more of art part of it all, and it's very high quality and it's very beautiful and it's very expensive many times. But then there's a lot that's been sold in stores like that is made in China. And in came a bunch of American tourists that wanted to buy Sami hats. And there were no hats left, but they were left some of those teapot coasters, what do you call them, that you put over tea kettles to keep them warm. There have been sewn Sami ribbons on them, so he sold them that as hats, which they proudly wore. Yeah. So, and we're of course we're trying, and Sami NGOs and the Saami Parliaments are pushing really, really hard to try to get some kind of regulations in order to not allow things like that. We do not want our handicraft being exploited. We do not want people to exploit our culture and I mean, do those kinds of things that the tourist companies are doing. So, yeah. And that is also a struggle, which plays into like EU rules and trade negotiations and such. So, but at least one can try to raise awareness on the topic. Yes.
I was wondering about the mining. On the Facebook page, there was a link to an article of you in which you said that Sweden was on its way to become the mining center of Europe.
Yeah.
As far as I know, Sweden is trying to become more and more sustainable
Yeah, but we have green mining in Sweden. Haven't you heard of it? And speaking of tourism, the former Minister of Industry, Annie Lööf, said that the future tourist thing in Sweden would be mining tourism. No, but seriously, that's what LKAB people and others say, that we have such high environmental regulations in Sweden, so it's more or less our obligation to mine the shit out of the Sami territory, because we do it so much better in such a better environmental and worker, what's the word for it? Well, better ethics towards the workers than what they would do in other countries. We wouldn't agree on that though. And mostly just because mines in our areas have a tendency to fail. I mean, not far from where I live, there are 2 mines that have gone bankrupt. One of them is Blaiken. Blaiken had 3 million Swedish crowns left in the bank to clean up when they went into bankruptcy. The estimate right now is that it will cost 230 millions to clean it up. And they will have to continue to work on it for 30 years. Who's going to pay? The taxpayers. And the mother company, for the mining company, they put this into a daughter company, I don't know what it's called in English, a subsidiary company that went into bankruptcy. The mother company is still well and is searching for minerals and starting mines in other areas, for example Finland right now. We have Northland Mine that went into bankruptcy, the largest bankruptcy in Sweden. So it's more or less just political speculation, where politicians in the north want something that will look good in front of the elections, but they do not think longer than 4 years. So yeah, right now Sweden is exporting about 98% of Europe's total iron ore production, and we're leading also in very many other minerals when it comes to the EU production of minerals, and it's being mostly taken out of Sami lands. And they're hoping to expand it.
Yes, thanks for the talk at first, it was really interesting. What I want to ask is, the culture, is it written down in a way? Is there a tradition to write down culture stories, or was it mainly told in the past? So there's just a new movement to write all the stories down.
Yeah, we didn't have a written language until pretty recently, so it's all been an oral tradition. But yeah, more or less like that. And then a lot of things has been written down, but yeah.
What are the other parts of the culture, of the Sami culture? Is there a theatre culture that way, or is there a puppetry culture, or what are the other ways how the culture expresses in the Sami population?
The Sami theatre in Norway won the highest prize, one of the highest prizes in Norway for one of its plays, Vidas Extremas, today actually. So we have a very thriving theatre tradition or theatres in the Sami territory right now, which is, for instance, the Sami theatre in Kiruna, which I would recommend you guys to check out.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to the mining question as well, because it's quite an emotional topic for many people when large mines are put onto land that they believe are theirs. But if the majority of the country want mining to go forward because they want the money to go back into the kind of taxpayers' coffers, and are you against mining full stop, or you just want to have more say, or I don't quite understand?
Well, the policy that we have adopted says that we want ILO 169 and other, the complex of rights that has been written internationally, considering indigenous peoples, what's considered a minimum level to be implemented into Sweden first. and then we want to talk about mines. When we've got our rights secured, then we are open to discussion. That's basically what we've, like the basic rule in our mining policy, but generally, if you look at indigenous peoples globally, Professor Anaya, who was the former special rapporteur for the UN on indigenous issues, he has written a paper on this, where it shows that indigenous peoples who do not have control of their land are often just no. Because if you say one yes, you don't know if you're opening the door to a flood or how it's going to be used. So you just for safety, you say no. Indigenous peoples with control over their lands, they start discussing and finding ways. And I think that's kind of true. It's some basic human principle. That is how we work. But because, as I said, we want to live in the north for many thousand years more. We want sustainable societies. So if we're going to do something to that area, we need to think about it very, very carefully. And we need to be sure that it's the best way forward. And if we can make sure, if we can agree upon that this mine would be the best way forward, then I'm sure we could get a yes for it. That wouldn't be a problem. But it needs to be taken into much more careful consideration than what it is today. So, yes.
I wonder if there's something what tourists can actually do to support the Sami, or like there are so many exchange students here, people who stay for quite a short time. Is there anything like?
Are you thinking about Uppsala?
No, at all.
In Sweden or
yeah,
Sami Parliament?
Sweden at all. I mean, if you say that there's like a lot of craft which is sold, but it's not actually of Sami people. So, is there anything what you can do to support?
Well, there is a lot of Sami craft that is being sold and accessible to people in general, and of course that is a great way to support people, Sami handicrafters that are trying to make a living out of it. There are silversmiths, and there are knife makers, and there are all kinds of traditional craftspeople, and non-traditional as well, and artists and such. So I mean, that's one thing you can look up. There are several websites that sell authentic Sami things. There is a specific mark that is being given to authentic Sami handicraft through the Sami Duchi, the Sami Handicraft Stiftelse Foundation, yes, Sami Handicraft Foundation, which is also something you can go and check out. But if you see that mark, it's authentic. Sometimes it is, even if it doesn't have it. I think it's fairly easy to find out. I would guess that it is, at least if it's not plasticky, and if those tin bracelets are not always, they're usually made by people who are outside of Sami culture, even though they're traditionally Sami. So that's one way. Then there are Sami companies. If you find a company that is saying that they're Sami on Swedish grounds, then they're probably Sami. In Finland, you should worry a bit. In Norway, you're also pretty safe. In Russia, you should also be terrified. So,
is it like the only way to support the Sami through money?
No, of course not. I mean, I think perhaps the best thing you could go do from coming from this place is either to like tweet a politician to say, yo, what's up with Sami rights in Sweden? How about ILO 169? Or talk to people about this issue, or write an email, or write something yourselves. I guess most of you are here at the university. There's a need for more research on these issues. People looking into, is this really sustainable, for instance? So, I mean, there's so many different things you can do. Yes.
I'm interested in what extent you're involved in, the Sami people are involved in indigenous issues in other parts of the world? Like, what are the other indigenous peoples you work most closely with? What countries?
Yeah. Again, it comes back to funding. We all wish we would do more, but we simply do not have the funds. In the Saami Parliament today, I work 60%, and we have the president who works 100%, and then that's all of the politicians that work on these issues. The rest are paid by the meeting days, and we have a staff that is fully busy with their government agency things. But still we try to keep a cooperation, mostly, like I said, through the UN Permanent Forum or through the Sami Parliamentarian Council, which is our joint organization where we work together with the Sami Parliament. The Norwegian Sami Parliament is doing more. They have a person permanently working in New York on indigenous issues globally, and trying, for instance, to push for a better participation of indigenous peoples in the UN. For instance, for us to be able to represent ourselves through our indigenous organizations as equals to the states. Yeah. I see that we're running over, but so I don't really know what to do. We have some questions more. Could I take them? Or
We have a few minutes, yeah.
Okay.
We have until half.
Oh, you have until half. Oh, good. All right. So we'll start from the front and then even. Yeah. Yes.
Oh.
Right.
There was a court case back in February about the Sami land rights up north. I was wondering if you could elaborate on why it was so important. Most of the articles I've read on it haven't said much more than this is very important.
Yay for journalists. It's a complicated matter. It's the Girjas case, it's called. It's the Girjas reindeer herding district that sued the Swedish state over the hunting and fishing rights in their reindeer herding district. And I mean, if you look at the history, again, we were divided into two groups in the 20s. The reindeer herders who were allowed to continue to hunt and fish, they had the sole right to the hunting and fishing in that area, at least of the small predators, or the small animals, not predators, but small animals, until 1993. And then the state took it about when they formed the Sami Parliament. So they formed the Sami Parliament and they took the hunting and fishing rights from the Sami herding organizations. And now this Sami herding organization sued the state to get it back. And it's been selected by the Sami reindeer herders organization, their branch organization, to say SSR as a pilot case. Because they have very strong papers, there's a lot of research that they can prove their claims to the land, or the Sami claims to the land. And they won in round one. And of course the Swedish state appealed. But why it's important is just plainly because it isn't a matter of giving someone any rights. We have them according to Swedish law principles. We've used this land for such a long period of time. We were first to do it and we've continued to do it. So it isn't actually Sweden granting us any extra rights. If we talk about Sami rights, if anything, it's them treating us as equals, because anyone else who had used this land for such a number of time would also have worked up this right, achieved this right. So I mean, why it's important is that it proves these principles, that there are certain land rights that those Samis are owners of. But I mean, from my perspective as a non-reindeer herder and representing non-reindeer herding people, when I'm not talking solely out of my role as as vice president, but also from my political party side. Of course, there are a lot of Samis that are not reindeer herders and not member of the reindeer herding organization, because you can't become it if they won't approve, if they do not approve you, and they rarely do. So they can't get access to their traditional rights in a legal way. Still, a lot of people continue to hunt and fish as they've always done. And if they were to bring it to court, they would also win, probably, if we could prove it. So, but I don't, that's something we can work out ourselves and in the future, I think. So just basically, it's a good thing that they won, and I hope they will continue to win. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you so much for a very interesting and inspiring presentation. I have two questions, if that's okay. My first was, I was really impressed by what you said about the 80% of biodiversity being in lands governed by indigenous peoples, and I was curious to hear more about like the sort of strategies for conservation or sort of stewardship and valuing land from the Sami perspectives. And then secondly, at CMIS we talk a lot about how to be a leader and make a difference in like issues that we're passionate about. And I'm interested about your personal journey to becoming a politician. It's something that, you know, maybe you can be a bit jaded about the world of politics, but yeah, how it's been for you to become a politician and how you feel that allows you to be an active for change and about the things that you're passionate about.
Yeah. All right. Well, as I said in the beginning, a lot of it is just pretty simple. It's like, well, you look very carefully at the nature, and you keep in mind what's been happening there a long while ago. When you have use of the old stories, so you know what's considered lots of fish in that lake, and you know what's little. And when you see that you're getting close to little, you move to another area. You don't drain a resource, for instance, and you keep in mind the principle that, which isn't really spoken, but is more given to you in bits and pieces, that you can't really be separated from nature. Nature and the landscape and humans are one, and there's no stranger thought, according to the Sami culture, as I believe it, than a nature reserve and then a city. And like this idea of we're dividing ourselves, this is where the nature is, and this is where the people is. That's not how we view life. It's more of the fact that we can give and enrich each other. The wilderness, the European lost wilderness that people talk about to be found in the north of Sweden, isn't a coincidence that we've preserved that landscape. But also, if you look at it with the right goggles, you'll see that it isn't wilderness, it's a cultural landscape. It's been shaped by the reindeer, it's been shaped by the people, it's been shaped by a principle of don't leave any traces after you go. You hide what you've left. I mean, if you have to leave something, you hide it. If you take it down, if you build something and you're going to leave it, for instance, just small things like that. And a sensitivity to what the landscape actually looks like. But yeah, if you start looking, you'll see that everything has been used. Well, I guess you can talk about this forever, and various ways that the Sami view lands and waters and principles that govern it, but a lot of it goes down to local level. And what the Samis on the local level know about that specific region, it's not easy, everything is not easily generalized. Which is why when you're doing something, you really need to talk to the local Samis and view them as experts on the land instead of a strange group of people with no papers and no university degrees to back up what they're saying, but instead people who have lived for generations and really told the stories of the place. Well, and the other part is I grew up in a very politically engaged family. We used to talk a lot about politics around the table. I have a Swedish father and a Sami mother, and we used to argue and throw doors at each other, slam the doors. But so I've been, I mean, it's kind of been a part of my life always to talk about politics. I think it's super interesting, but I also think that it's a reality for very many Samis to just talk about politics. Like, you go to parties, you go to dinners, you stop and talk to someone, a friend at a gas station when you're like fueling your car or wherever, and you talk about mines or windmills or something or school, or it's just present everywhere. But anyhow, I rode in on a banana peel into politics. I was happy enough to meet a member of the party I am now the vice chair of. And it was all the party that was interested in joining. And they were forming a youth council. And they, I guess, had no idea what to do with it. And all the parties did not do the best job concerning youth. But I got the question if I wanted to join. And that was kind of the start of it. And I realized that I really love this. It's wonderful to be able to work on these issues. And even if my job mostly is traveling around and yelling at people who are not doing their job at the Swedish state, it's anyhow 10 times better than sitting at home and being pissed in the back, sitting in your kitchen and saying that they should do better. It feels great to be able to actually go to them instead. So I consider myself extremely privileged to be in the position that I am. Yeah. In the back.
Yeah, this will be the last one.
Oh, all right. I hope that there is no one who's been waiting for an hour. But you can come to me afterwards and we can talk. But yeah, the last question.
Yeah, well, it's actually maybe a long question, so maybe I can come.
If you want to. Maybe so.
It's more about like because you have been talking about the fact that Sami people they still need to live, which I totally understand and like relate and everything, and like that you say they need to have an income and things like that. And so my question is actually split in two parts. It's like what has the like Occidental culture brought to Sami culture in terms of like facilities and things like that, and how much it is necessary to keep going with this system. And when I say system, it's more economical system. Would you be, because you've talked about like the fact that sometimes in community it's based on like exchange and things like that, but would it be thinkable that Sami people are quitting the economical system and like not rely on Sweden anymore in terms of like living conditions?
I read this old book by a Sami lady, an old Sami lady as well. I think she was old when she wrote it, and I think she's passed by now. Where she said that the old Sami communities were actually pretty communistic. Also, again, because there was a lot of trade and people being treated as equals, and no kings and queens. Well, I mean, I understand that a lot of what the Swedish state were doing during the early 1900s and such were out of goodwill. They didn't They didn't destroy the foundation for a lot of the Sami culture. They didn't take Sami children from their homes. They didn't force Sami children to stop talking Sami, to be mean many times. It was to ensure that they could be integrated into the society. It was that standard of the time. And of course, it brought a lot of terrible things to the Sami culture. A lot of people have been cut off from their culture and feel very uprooted and rootless, and trying to come back and learn more of who they actually are. But at the same time, I guess part of it was good, where the indigenous people with the best health in the world, the Sami people, as far as I'm concerned, from the statistics that we have. So I mean, that has part also worked for us. And we have access to schools and university, even if they're not in Sami with the Sami content. So in part we treat us as equals, but if equals is that everyone has the same access to only Swedish school in Swedish with Swedish content, then yes. But if the Sami culture and the Swedish culture is supposed to be equal, then it's not. I mean, yes, good things have come. Bad things have also come. The future, I know that there's a lot of strong Sami voices speaking against this idea of the constant tillväxt, growth, the constant growth in society, and that it's not sustainable, and that we're seeing more and more destruction of our lands. I'm seriously worried for the future, and again, it's feeding climate change and such, but the idea of growth and everything kind of runs against the Sami traditional land use. But we haven't really got a Sami Bitcoin or alternative, different alternatives yet. So yeah, I guess I'll round it up and say thank you for having me. It's been a great honor. Please feel free to contact me. And as we spoke of before, I'd be happy if you would tweet or do just a little bit with this information that I've given to you. Thanks.
I think she has just rounded up very nicely. Not sure if you're joining us for the next. Maybe, okay. So some of us from the course, we're going to Uppland Station with Dr. Rune. She has said she's maybe going to come, so that's a yes, maybe. So please feel free to join us there if you want to continue this conversation. And thanks again for coming.
De gör sådär i föreläsningar. De har gjort det på fotografier.
Ja. Men annars får du mat och sen
Ja, eller så åker jag hem och får mat.
Ja, det är inte lika roligt.
Vad har jag att säga? Because you've been here back
I'm going home now.
Like that if you want to, they want to yeah, I'm gonna work, I'm gonna understand. But it's say again? I'm gonna work in it.